a beautiful night in the hood. It's a beautiful night in the hood. Gonna be hanging out in the hood.
Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball. So today is June 21st, and we are actually between the first and the second game of a Mets doubleheader today. So it actually seemed kind of appropriate to talk about doubleheaders in baseball. And
Doubleheaders are a dying breed, right? But not in this post-pandemic season with the 7-inning doubleheaders and whatnot.
And I think the 7-inning doubleheaders is actually an idea I'm more on board with. I'm okay with that. But mostly, at least in modern day baseball, doubleheaders are born out of pretty much weather stuff only, realistically.
Right. They originally there were more doubleheaders played in September than any other month because you were making up the games that were missed earlier in the season, and you just schedule a bunch of doubleheaders back in.
And you know, now that I even think about it, that was probably something you had to do a lot more because you didn't have teams flying everywhere. So like you could staying an extra day or getting somewhere early was not nearly as feasible.
And before the 1930s, you didn't have night games. So that also would make it more
very impact the number of double because you could only play a doubleheader by starting at like first thing in the morning then.
But, you know, just over the weekend, the Mets played a doubleheader against the Nationals, making up for one of the COVID canceled games at the beginning of the season. And the Mets have played fewer games than any team in baseball. And they had two single admission games, meaning you had two games. There were two admissions. So you went to the first game. It was noon or 1 o'clock. And the second game was at 5 o'clock. And it was a separate admission. And they were both 7-inning games. And so my question was, wait a second.
No, that's not cool.
Okay, right.
That's not cool. That's a dick move from the Washington Nationals. Just because, like,
they're hiding behind the rule that says that you could
charge for single admission for each of the games. It's like, wait a second. So now I'm not only do I only get one game, I only get a 7-inning game.
Right.
And I probably am still paying full price for the tickets.
You didn't pay 77% of the price. I agree.
Right.
You paid the whole price.
That's the problem with that. And I think most people, and the thing is nowadays, actually, what's unusual about that is most tickets, even though, as we'll get into in a little bit, the doubleheader was born out of a way to try and increase ticket sales.
Right.
Because you would get admission to both games for the price as one.
Right. There was always a fine line between giving the fans too much for their value, for their dollar, and try to draw them into the park. So you'd have bigger crowds for doubleheaders, and particularly bad teams would schedule doubleheaders because they were trying anything they could to get people into the ball.
Right. And so, people might not come out to watch a bad team, but, I get two games for the price of one? Not so bad now.
Yeah, I don't know that people feel the same way about that today.
I don't think that would have as much appeal to people today because it's just like, well, I'm still going to spend more money by going to a doubleheader.
Well, right, because you're eating, you eat twice, but you only have one parking. You only have one ticket fee. So there's certainly, but the value idea
is not nearly as strong.
Yeah, nor is the incentive. Remember when they were doing doubleheaders, and by the bad teams, there weren't other competing sports.
There wasn't other competing mediums to watch the game.
Right. You could only watch the game in person.
You could only see what was that. You could listen to the radio, but that's why going to the ballpark held such a greater allure than today, where you can watch it on TV.
Right, and as attendance figures went up, and actually this kind of came out of some of the pregame research I did, there are only 4 franchises in Major League Baseball history who have drawn more than 4 million fans in a season. Okay, you can probably come up with them pretty if you think about it.
I mean, the standard guess I would go with would be Yankees, Red Sox, Cubs, Cardinals.
Well, the Red Sox would not necessarily be, because they're traditionally that would be, so they don't have a lot of seats in that park.
It's not a big stadium.
Right, so the Yankees are correct, absolutely. The Toronto Blue Jays.
The Blue Jays.
Okay, were a team that did that. The New York Mets drew 4 million people at the last year Shea Stadium in 2008. And oddly enough, in its first season of existence, the Colorado Rockies drew 4 million fans too.
They're not drawing 4 million this year.
No. And so you don't need to have double headers when you're drawing 4 million fans.
You don't need double, or if you're good. If you're a team if you were a team that was in the pennant race and you had games that mattered going down the line, You didn't need to schedule doubleheaders because people would want to come and watch you. It was the last place team that was playing the second to last place team. They're the ones that needed doubleheader to get butts in the seat.
You make a good point, right? So scheduled doubleheaders before the season, they traditionally they didn't schedule many doubleheaders. They were makeups, as you said, of rainouts and doubleheaders back into. So they started in the late 1880s, real doubleheaders as the National League was born, and a few teams used them. But the Boston Braves, for instance, from 1900 to 1929, played over 800 doubleheaders. They were terrible, except for the Miracle Braves of 1914, which we talked about on this podcast. And so the only way, and Boston's a small town, so the Red Sox had lots of doubleheaders, and the Braves had lots of doubleheaders because they didn't have that many people, and they had to
And that was a way to
bring
entice
people
to come to the stadium because and then fans also knew then, oh, I can just wait because a doubleheader will be around the corner.
Right, that value proposition of getting 2 games for the price of one, the double dip, was just so important to fans in a way that it isn't today.
Well, especially because like you would have kids could go. You and your buddy as a teenager, 2 games for the price of 1. That's a great day.
Particularly before there were night games, right? All baseball games were day games until the 1930s.
Has a big influence on who's going to go watch that game.
So, as the AL came up, they played a lot of doubleheaders, and it's kind of impressive as to what percentage of games teams would play as doubleheaders in a season. And it ranged, from the early part of the 20th century, from as low as 13% all the way up to almost 35% of the games. Now, I'm not a math major, but I know that 1 out of 3 is 33%. That means that a third of their games, or a little more than that, were doubleheaders. That's a lot.
That's like it's crazy to think about. Like one that would have a profound impact on shortening the season.
Right. You could. Well, or if you had inclement weather, you
would have a lot more
deal
often
with it that way.
Well, also you'd have to have a lot more days for travel.
Right. You weren't flying places, but you weren't going as far either.
Probably.
You didn't go any further than St. Louis,
right?
Until 1958. So it didn't really matter.
So the travel wasn't that important.
Not as much. I mean, you were traveling by trains and whatnot, so it was not luxurious, certainly. So and what I thought was also interesting is that doubleheader days, which I guess we think now more of Sundays being doubleheader days, it was actually Saturdays that were the doubleheader days.
Makes sense.
I don't know why.
Not a religious day.
Yeah, there's part of that, right? And baseball wasn't played on Sunday, as we've also talked about.
Right, but if specifically you're trying to get people butts into the stadium with a doubleheader that's going to start early, you're not going to do it the same day church is going on.
Right. So the Red Sox and the Braves we talked about, the Reds, they were both, the Braves had their 1914 year, and the Red Sox won all those World Series in the teens, right? In 12, 15, and 18. And 16. And so they having had double headers was kind of interesting, is mainly because of the size of the city and the fact that they were just trying whatever they could to get people into the ballpark.
I mean, I'm assuming that was the peak period then, right? Like that 1920, like that 1900 to 1930 period.
It actually was later than that.
Really?
Peak, yeah. I don't really know why. It was after I think 1956 to 60 was like the peak of the doubleheader period. So, and it's just interesting to me that they kind of were steady, in that range, right, between 20 and 35% through the 30s, through World War II, and they hadn't yet gone to TV, obviously, so you didn't have those kinds of revenue opportunities.
So I wonder if it was a revenue thing, though, that I'm guessing that the relative costs of running a baseball team had probably gone up since the 30s, but fans probably were coming to games at roughly the same clip. If anything, they might have fallen off a little if prices had gone up. So do you think going to more doubleheaders was just a way to try and get people into the stadium?
I think that was the theory that they probably used. I question sometimes their ability to really effectively measure what was going on.
Because it wasn't a data-driven
right,
thing.
What was better? Like, we have lots of, we're going to sell more tickets if we have doubleheaders, and hopefully we'll pick up extra revenue in concession and
just having people in the ballpark.
Having people in the ballpark, as opposed to having 2 single admission games that would be of less interest. I assume they had some, actuarial reason for going, this is the thing to continue.
They weren't just doing it in a vacuum for no reason.
Right. The Dodgers, in 1945, had they played one more doubleheader, they would have played more games as doubleheaders than non-doubleheader games, which is crazy.
Now in 45, I can kind of understand why.
Right, the end of the war, and yes, people were hurting for players at the time, and just getting the games in was a challenge for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, and I said 56 to 60, it was before 56. That's when it began to turn around, and they went away from doubleheaders. So all the way up through 55.
So it was like mostly centered around, and it makes sense that you would see the rise of the doubleheader during the World War II years.
Right, and well, at its pinnacle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I mean. That's when you really see it become because less people around to see the games.
Right. And well, it was, during the war, the president, had to wrestle with whether or not to allow baseball to be played. And he thought it was good for the nation, and Roosevelt did, to play the World Series. And even in 1918, that season, they played the World Series.
For World War I.
For World War I and the pandemic, I guess was my relevant point there. And the commission said, we need they said, let's play baseball. The president said, let's play baseball games. We don't need to not play them.
Right. And then they did that again in World War II.
Right. So, teams played lots of doubleheaders until as we said, until 1960, but they still played them in the 60s. They were still playing from 61 to 73.
Because you still have to play doubleheaders to make up rainouts.
But they scheduled doubleheaders around holidays. So you'd have a Memorial Day doubleheader. You'd have a Father's Day doubleheader. Jim Bunning famously pitched a perfect game against the Mets on Father's Day in 1964 as the first game of a doubleheader.
Oh.
So, the second, who knows who won the second game,
and
right?
It is weird because it's like, I feel like doing it as part of a doubleheader makes it less memorable.
Right. Well, I don't remember who won the second game. I just remember the guy pitched the perfect game on Father's Day.
It's just like part of a doubleheader. It's like somehow it's like less meaningful than if it was its own standalone game, which is silly.
So since we highlight our Mets on this podcast, in the 60s, the one team that constantly broke the curve having more doubleheaders were the Mets, who in the 60s. And they're a new team that comes in 62 after the Dodgers and Giants moved to the West Coast, and they led the league in doubleheaders every year but one during the 60s. So they
is that
did
just because Shea was particularly rainy, or do you think they were
No, they scheduled these
in an attempt to get more people into the stadium,
trying to make a name for themselves as a value proposition, as the scrappy little team that could against the Yankees. And the Mets did something and I remember this because I did it one time. So they had something called Banner Day. Okay,
I think you told me about this before.
So Banner Day, and I guess Banner Day doubleheader, it was like a circle on the calendar. And so the fans would make these homemade banners, and they would line up behind the center field fence out at Shea Stadium, and they would open the gates between the games of the doubleheader, and you'd march with your little banner going, "I love the Mets," or whatever it would be. And there were thousands of people that would walk through and carry their banner. And Banner Day would make the break between the games like an hour and a half, because there were so many Met fans. I don't know another team that really did it the way the Mets did it.
And
that would never play in Yankee Stadium, right?
No.
They have, far too much,
They're too
respect for
good.
history.
The Blue Bloods would never do.
Doubleheader banners.
The fans on the field.
That's very Mets. So, and as doubleheaders progressed, so we said it was at as high as 35%.
It is interesting, though, now that we're talking about this, how much of this kind of discussion goes hand in hand with all of the old baseball owners discussion and the stadiums discussion and the wacky promotions that they used to try and pull to get people into the stadium.
Oh, yeah.
And you could see this following along a very similar track where it was more relevant at the beginning of baseball, but then as time has gone on, it's just kind of found a new purpose.
Right, and so we said 35% that were doubleheaders at its pinnacle, and into the 70s now, it's down to 14% in the National League, and dwindles all the way down in terms of percentage of games played as doubleheaders by the early 90s to 2%. 3%.
Because teams don't want to schedule them anymore.
And they're drawing 4 million fans a year. Why would we want to give away
We're selling
one
out
of the games?
Wait a second. We're going to sell out every game regardless of whether or not we're giving away one for free. Why would we give away an entire game's worth of tickets?
But the change then happens with the further growth of cable TV, right?
And when the majority of their revenue is no longer coming from specifically stadium
only
admissions.
from ticket sales, correct. So now you've got all these other revenue opportunities. Playing a doubleheader isn't as revenue poor for you as it would have been because you're getting all this ancillary revenue for your TV rights and your advertising and so on and so forth. So, doubleheaders are something that are going to continue to sort of be at this very low level. We're going to see more this year, I think, only because of some weird,
but that's pretty
COVID
much done
protocols.
at this point.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see any more of that in this particular season. The 7-inning doubleheader, do you think it's here to stay after this?
So I thought it was really interesting because Lindor actually came out the other day and said, I'm in favor of the 7-inning doubleheaders. Anybody that isn't, should come out.
Because I still get paid everything.
Which is a point people were using to rebut his point. But he was saying, you should come out here and play 18 innings of baseball in the same day. And so I tend to agree with Lindor, but I also understand why fans are pissed. Because it would be like if we wanted golfers to play 36 holes in a day.
Right, and that happens in a couple of tournaments, but by and large, that doesn't happen on the
because
PG.
it's not, and so I could understand why they're like, look, if we're going to play two games of baseball, cutting out 2 innings, they still get paid the same, which is a lot of people are like, oh, that's real easy for you to say when you're going to still get paid for 18 innings.
Unless they try the stupid 2 admission things, that they can't do. I don't think you can show up and play a 7-inning game 1 o'clock and go, all right, we're going to kick back for a few hours afterwards and we'll play the night game, and when everybody come in and pay again, you're going to get another 7-inning game.
No, that's bullshit.
So that has to go by the wayside. But I
I'm
agree.
fine with 7-inning doubleheaders.
Me too.
If anything, it's an interesting, it makes the games feel snappier.
Yeah.
Which is one of the bigger problems with doubleheaders, especially as somebody that's played in them. Those first 3 innings of game 2 suck.
and before the sticky stuff happened, and it's related here, right? Because earlier this season, pitchers couldn't get anybody out, and it was just a hit fest. It was just a strikeout fest to have them, get the bat and not do anything for 18 innings in a row.
Right. It was just and then you were having extra inning games left and right because literally nobody could score. So you're talking about playing like 20 plus innings of baseball on the same day and where nobody's getting any hits. It's just boring.
But just the mention of checking the pitchers has already had an impact.
Stark impact.
Yes. So I think that changes it because you don't have to say, well, we don't have enough pitching was my point to play double headers like
not
that.
with the modern way we do pitching.
Well, and not with the fact that guys just couldn't get anybody out. Couldn't get any base hits. It's horrible.
Well, yeah, but still, even then, like, doubleheaders worked a lot better when you had maybe 3 starters on your team and you're like, okay, game 1, this guy's going to pitch the game.
Right.
Game 2, this guy's going to pitch the game. You can't do that anymore.
Or in the case of, I believe, Wilbur Wood, who was a knuckleballer for the Chicago, he pitched both games of a doubleheader and won them both.
Yeah, that's just, you couldn't, like we were even watching this game 1.
It wasn't that long ago either.
We were talking about watching this game 1 that Seth Lugo came in the 6th inning of the 7-inning doubleheader and got out of this, gave up a 2-run home run to make it a 4-2 game. But before that, we were talking about, he can go another inning and then you save the closer for the next game. Like, that's the kind of strategic decision that you didn't have to use to make. It used to be, he will pitch until either the game is over or we are down by so many runs, it doesn't matter who goes into pitch.
Or his arm falls off, right.
Yeah.
Because he's still out there.
It's like we could have literally just start putting in fans and it'll be the same thing.
So, the impact of playing doubleheaders, as the Mets are doing more this year than they probably would want to, is who wins doubleheaders? Like, so what happens?
I would assume roughly that, like, the home team does slightly better in doubleheaders, but, like, they're probably, like, most of them end up in splits.
Right. Most doubleheaders, are split, but the home team sweeps a little more than they split.
Okay. So if you're the home team, you have a slightly better chance than not of sweeping than splitting, and it's pretty unlikely for you to get swept as the home team.
That is also true, although I read because I have all this time to spend, right, on reading bizarre baseball abstracts on doubleheader sweeps and what the psychological aspect of winning the first game is in terms of your success in the second game if you are the home team. And they measured testosterone levels. This is a bizarre study that happened from 2002 to 2014.
Which is weirdly during a time where very, very few doubleheaders were being
There's
played.
300, I think their set was 320 doubleheaders or so that they evaluated over the period.
It does make sense to me that if you win game 1, you have a slightly better than 50% chance of winning game 2. Because just from the perspective of first off, generally the better team is going to win games more often than not. So the better team winning the first game still means the better team is more likely to win the second game.
And if they're home.
It's a lot of added advantages.
So the really good teams are, 60% or more wins. The really bad teams are 40% or more losses.
So that but I also think it's something to do with you get down in that second game after you lost the first one. Like you're the Pittsburgh Pirates this year. Hate to pick on them, but it's too easy. You're the Pittsburgh Pirates. You're playing the doubleheader against the Mets. Game 1, you lose to Jacob deGrom 4-2. Game 2, the Mets come out. They put up like 5 or 6 early on to you. It's now like the top of the 5th inning, and you're down like 7-2. It's as much as we talk about how everybody's a competitor. There's a point in that game where you're just like, ready to pick it up and start again tomorrow.
And it's certainly more of a function of the quality of the team playing.
Right. When you have a good team beating a bad team, but you could get the flip side where you get a really hungry bad team that wins game 1. They come up and get an early lead on game 2. And a team like the Mets that should be winning that doubleheader, they just throw in the towel today because they're like, they just don't want to deal with it anymore.
So maybe the Mets, who are like ducking right now because they've got all these doubleheaders, like they have 3 in like 7 days, they're going, oh, this is hard. We don't have enough pitching for this. But they're right now a good team, I guess. And so that they should be looking at it possibly going, wait, we have a better chance than not to sweep 3 doubleheaders.
If I'm the Mets, it's just really big in getting game 1. If you can win game 1 of all those doubleheaders, it makes your life a lot easier because you have to care so much about your pitching. That if you need to just sack a game 2, like you're like, okay, the starter we had out there just didn't have it. Rather than murder my bullpen, I'm just going to let us get killed today.
Well, and on Saturday, the Mets split a doubleheader with the Nationals in Washington. They won the first game, 5-2, fairly handily. And then in the second game, they didn't score. They lost 2-0. It was a really boring, quiet 7. So they're on the road. They're not home. And even if they have a better record than the Nationals, it's still going to be a sweep. It's going to be the time.
Exactly.
A split.
It's going to be really hard, especially to sweep a road series with a doubleheader in it.
Right. So there have been, I counted 1 triple header, and it made me think in 1920, the Pirates played a triple header, and I don't know what the circumstances.
It seems like a gimmick.
Like, well, why would you? Could you imagine 9 hours of baseball? Maybe the games were an hour and 10 minutes in those days, so maybe it only took.
How are they an hour and 10 minutes back? The only thing I could think is that like you start the first game at like 9 a.m., 9 to 12, take like a half-hour break, you come back at first.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because this was 1920, so there's no night game.
So
they played 3 games during the day.
You might have had to start that game before 9 a.m. in order to get all of them in.
The games didn't take as long. So we're all accustomed to 3-hour baseball games, and there were plenty of 2-hour games or less.
So you could probably start at like 9:30 in the morning and get them all in.
And that was interesting. 1920, the first year they outlawed the spitball. The end of the dead ball era is upon us.
While also being the only triple header.
Yeah. So
that is a wild baseball season.
That season just sticks out in my mind. So do you think that doubleheaders are going to, be limited to just rainouts and so they're not scheduling?
You're not going to schedule them anymore. The only reason you would schedule them,
nostalgia. How about a banner day doubleheader?
They eventually would wrap back around to being like a weird kind of kitschy thing where you're just like, oh, let's do a doubleheader today. The fans will find that quirky and weird. But like, as long as there's rainouts, it's not like fans are going to forget what doubleheaders are. It would change if every team went to having domed stadiums, and so there were no more rainouts. Then you might see more schedule.
It's a marketing thing.
Then it's going to be a marketing thing. But as long as you have teams having regular rainouts as part of their schedule, I don't know how much teams are going to go to scheduling them anytime soon.
I see that the doubleheader, as we call it, kind of falling into the 2 separate admissions being 9-inning games. I don't think MLB can get away with, maybe they'll try because the players are probably going to say, sure, we'll play 2 7-inning games, instead of
the players. The players don't care at all about the fan proposition on that side. To them, they're just like, okay, wait a second, 2 less innings on 14 innings instead of 18 innings. Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
And the managers, a few of the managers that I've read their comments on, surprisingly say, I didn't like it, when I first heard about it, but it's kind of growing on me and I like it now. It kind of makes sense. You know why? Because it's allowing them to manage their pitching staffs.
It makes it so much easier to manage your pitchers in a doubleheader. Because especially if you in a doubleheader, you have the Mets had DeGrom going in game 1. Now game 2 is going to have first pitch here in a couple minutes.
How's your arm?
Yeah. We literally, I don't think we or the Mets know who is starting game 2. So if you're pitching a 9-inning game, you're like, God, I hope this guy can at least give me 3. Because otherwise you're trying to put together 7, 8 innings out of your bullpen when you've already used some of your better guys.
And there's no truth to the rumor that there's a tryout in the parking lot outside Citi Field to pitch game 2. It's not true, despite what you may have
I can't believe Gesellman's out for 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah. So I think that they affect the season probably in more of a way, and I don't really have the figures, to back that up, but just when I read about that home teams and good teams sweep more doubleheaders, that becomes significant if a team has a
wacky number of doubleheaders in a season.
It could affect
the Mets this year. It could affect them a little bit, but at the same time, they're still a good team. Did it really change anything?
No, it could if they win the division by a game or 2 or make a wild card because
they still won.
They outperformed in doubleheaders.
Yeah, but they still won those games. They still had to play the baseball games and win them.
But there's an advantage, certainly, or so it seems.
Right, yeah, but quantifying how real that advantage actually is kind of hard.
So I don't, July 4th, which is upcoming, is one of those, days for doubleheaders. I don't think there are any doubleheaders scheduled.
No, they don't schedule them anymore.
There's no Memorial Day doubleheaders. Because you don't need to draw the fan to come to the ballpark and get 2 for the price of 1. So I think doubleheaders are, they're
unfortunately kind of a relic of the past.
Yes, I think that's true. And no other sport, right? You don't see
physically you can't.
Right. How about an NBA doubleheader?
No. Not unless you wanted to watch a really, really bad second game.
Exactly. So that the baseball is the only sport, and they're going by the wayside too.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at AlmostCoop.